Why don't they believe us? We saw them with our own eyes. The voice echoed through the sterile room, accompanied by the frustrated clatter of a datapad thrown onto the table. Captain Varric of the Zel-Tunian Expeditionary Fleet clenched his claws into the table's surface. He had been leading this investigation for years, following every faint rumor and clue, only to be mocked, ridiculed, and ignored by the Council. Across the table, Lieutenant Kor kept his composure. Because, sir, they think humans are nothing more than folklore, ghost stories meant to entertain the younger species. Varric's frustration simmered under his scaled skin. Folklore? The notion was absurd. He had seen the evidence, the ruins, the technology too advanced for any species in this quadrant. They had all pointed to the elusive race that disappeared from the galactic stage millennia ago. And yet, every time he presented his findings, they were dismissed as exaggerations or misunderstandings. But he couldn't forget what he had seen. There are no more myths left in the galaxy, Varric said, his voice low and serious. Every other story has been disproven, every legend unraveled, except this one. Kor shifted uneasily. Sir, I don't disagree, but the Council won't entertain your theories. Humans were never officially documented. The records we've seen are vague at best. They think it's all fabrication. Varric raised an eyebrow. And yet the artifacts we found on those derelict planets match no known species. The weapons we discovered. Who else could have built those? Kor hesitated. I've seen the relics too, Captain, but the Council wants proof of a living human, not just relics from a forgotten age. Then we'll give them what they want, Varric said sharply. We'll find the humans. A long pause followed as Kor stared at the captain. He couldn't quite tell if Varric was serious or just venting frustration. The galaxy was vast, and the number of dead-end systems they had already explored was too many to count. Still, Kor nodded, if only because disobeying Varric's obsession wasn't an option. The door hissed open, and a young officer stepped in, holding a data chip. Captain Varric, we received a transmission from the edge of the Nyx system. Varric's eyes lit up. What kind of transmission? The officer shifted nervously. It's strange, sir. Uncoded and on an ancient frequency we haven't seen used in thousands of years. It came from a small, uncharted planet near a dead star. Varric shot a glance at Kor. An ancient frequency? The officer nodded. Yes, sir. It's been dormant for, well, the records show no activity since before our species developed space travel. Without another word, Varric snatched the chip from the officer's hand and inserted it into the console. The screen flickered to life, showing static before an image slowly came into view. A small, desolate planet. The camera was shaky, but something about the environment seemed eerily familiar. Then the sound came. At first it was nothing more than garbled noise, but as the signal stabilized, words began to emerge, crackling through the speakers. We are here. Kor's brow furrowed. Who sent this? The officer pointed at the console. The signal originated from the planet, sir. But that's not all. He tapped a few buttons, and the screen zoomed in on the planet's surface. There, half buried in the dirt and debris, was a structure. It was clearly old, ancient even, but unmistakably artificial. It's human, Varric whispered, his voice barely audible. How do you know? Kor asked, incredulous. Varric leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen that kind of architecture before on the dead worlds they had explored, but this time it wasn't just ruins. This was a functioning structure, a beacon in the middle of a forgotten planet, calling out to anyone who would listen. We need to go there, Varric said suddenly, standing up from his chair. Captain, we can't just. I said we're going there, Varric snapped. Prepare the ship. This could be our only chance to prove what I've been saying all along. Humans are real, and they're still out there. The lieutenant hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, sir. The journey to the Nyx system was quiet. The atmosphere on board was tense. Varric stood on the command deck, staring at the distant planet as it slowly grew larger in the view screen. His mind raced with possibilities. If humans were still alive, what would they be like? Were they the same species that had once ruled vast portions of the galaxy? Or had they devolved into something else? Something less? The ship touched down on the planet's barren surface, kicking up clouds of dust and ash. As soon as the airlock opened, Varric and Kor stepped out, their boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. The structure they had seen on the screen loomed in the distance, half buried in the dirt. They made their way toward it, the silence oppressive. There was no sign of life, no movement, but the beacon was still active, broadcasting its eerie message into the void. When they finally reached the structure, Varric hesitated for a moment before placing a hand on the cold metallic surface. It was smooth, worn down by centuries of exposure to the elements, but unmistakably human in design. He glanced at Kor, who nodded. Together, they pushed open the large rusted doors, which creaked ominously as they swung inward. The inside was dark, lit only by the dim glow of flickering lights along the walls. And then they saw it. At the far end of the room, seated in a chair in front of a control panel, was a figure. It was humanoid, wearing a tattered uniform that had long since faded. Its face was obscured by a helmet, and its body slumped forward, unmoving. Varric took a step closer, his heart racing. He reached out his clawed hand, trembling slightly, as he touched the figure's shoulder. The figure stirred. Kor drew his weapon instinctively, but Varric raised a hand to stop him. The figure slowly lifted its head, revealing a face that was unmistakably human, though pale and gaunt, as if it had been asleep for centuries. "Who are you?" the human rasped, its voice weak but clear. Varric stared, speechless. The myths were true. Varric froze, his mind struggling to process the figure before him. A human, alive, breathing, right in front of him. The galaxy had all but forgotten their existence, and yet here one sat, buried in a desolate corner of the universe. The human coughed, a raspy, dry sound that echoed in the dim chamber. "You're not one of us, are you?" The words were slow, cautious, as if the human hadn't spoken in a very long time. Varric took a step back, fighting the urge to respond too quickly. He had so many questions, but he knew better than to overwhelm this moment. "No," he answered carefully. "We're from the Zonian species, part of the Galactic Union. You've been lost for a long time." The human let out a sound, a half-laugh, half-sigh. "Lost? Is that what they say?" His pale eyes scanned Varric, then Kor, who still had his hand nervously hovering over his weapon. The human slowly leaned back in the chair, his body stiff, like it hadn't moved in years. "We were never lost," the human said, his voice almost bitter. "We chose to disappear." Varric's breath caught. He had assumed humans vanished due to war, disease, or some other catastrophe. But this was something else entirely. "Why?" Varric asked, his voice a whisper. "Why would you leave the galaxy behind?" The human tilted his head slightly, a trace of amusement in his eyes. "Because we had seen enough, fought enough, built enough. We decided it wasn't worth it anymore." Kor shifted uncomfortably. "So you just abandoned everything?" The human's gaze snapped to Kor, sharp and direct. "No." We watched, quietly from a distance, observed as the galaxy continued its endless cycles. "But we never truly left." "Observed?" Varric repeated. "From where? How?" A flicker of a smile crossed the human's face, but it quickly vanished. "There are more of us, scattered, hidden, waiting." He paused, as if weighing whether to continue. "The others, they won't be so welcoming when they realize you're here." Kor stiffened, his hand inching closer to his weapon. "Is that a threat?" The human's eyes locked onto Kor's, a warning. Varric waved Kor down, urging calm. His mind raced with possibilities. If this human was telling the truth, and more of them were out there, what were they waiting for? Why hide for so long? The galaxy had moved on without them, but the myths of their prowess remained. And now, face to face with one, Varric began to understand why those legends endured. "You said there are more of you," Varric began slowly, carefully choosing his words. "Are they still on this planet?" The human didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked toward the entrance of the structure, his expression unreadable. Finally, he leaned forward. "Not on this planet, but close enough." Varric's claws clicked against the floor as he paced, deep in thought. There was too much unknown. If there were indeed more humans nearby, would they view the Zonian as allies or invaders? And how advanced were they after all these centuries? "You mentioned watching," Varric said, turning back to the human. "What have you been watching for?" The human's lips curled into a bitter smile. "For the galaxy to learn." "But it hasn't, has it?" Varric remained silent, absorbing the weight of the statement. It wasn't an accusation, it was a fact. The galaxy's wars hadn't ended. Its struggles hadn't ceased. Despite the countless species that joined the Galactic Union, peace remained fragile. The human continued. "We thought maybe things would change after we stepped away, but the galaxy is as violent as ever, isn't it?" Kor spoke up, his voice tight. "There's peace, or at least there's more of it now than there used to be." "Is that what they tell you?" the human asked quietly. "Or is that what you choose to believe?" Kor fell silent, his eyes narrowing in suspicion, but Varric could see the weight of the human's words hanging in the air. It was a truth neither of them could deny. The human was right. There were still conflicts, still old grudges between species, still destruction. The Galactic Union was a patchwork of treaties barely holding together at times. Varric knew they couldn't afford to linger on philosophy, not with this new discovery hanging over them. "You said your people are hidden. Are you in contact with them? Can you reach them?" The human shook his head, his expression serious. "I haven't had contact in years. I was stationed here as a monitor, to observe and report. But my systems, they broke down over time." He glanced at the flickering lights around him, evidence of the decay. "I haven't been able to reach anyone in a long while. For all I know, they've moved on. But they might still be out there." Varric pressed on. The human hesitated. "Yes. And if they are, you don't want to meet them unprepared." Kor's hand finally left his weapon, but his expression remained guarded. "What exactly are they waiting for? To come back to reclaim the galaxy?" The human gave a small shake of his head. "We have no interest in ruling again. We've seen where that leads." He paused, his eyes distant. "But if the galaxy forces our hand, we will respond." Varric's mind swirled with the implications. Humans hidden for millennia, observing and waiting with the ability to strike if provoked. And now, he was standing at the threshold of that power. He couldn't decide if it was a discovery to celebrate or fear. "What do we do now?" Kor asked, his voice a whisper. Varric glanced at the human, then back toward their ship. The answer wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. They couldn't leave without knowing more. Varric's mind churned with questions, but he knew time was running out. If what the human said was true, then his people were still out there, hidden and waiting for the right moment to reemerge. The Zonian captain weighed his options. They could leave, report back to the council with this newfound knowledge, and be hailed as heroes for rediscovering humanity. But something told him it wouldn't be that simple. "What happens if we leave?" Varric asked, breaking the silence. The human's pale eyes regarded him carefully. "You'll report what you found. Others will come. They'll search just like you did. But my people won't stay hidden forever. If they sense a threat, they'll act." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And when they do, the galaxy will be reminded why humans were feared in the first place." Kor's jaw tightened, but Varric remained calm. "Is that what you want for your people? To return with violence?" The human didn't flinch. "What we want is peace. But the galaxy is rarely that simple. If you leave us alone, we'll stay in the shadows. But if you seek us out, force us out, you'll be faced with a decision no species should ever have to make." Varric studied the human, weighing the truth in his words. There was no malice in his tone, only certainty. He was no threat, at least not now. But the stories that had been passed down through the galaxy for millennia suddenly seemed more real than ever. The humans weren't just legends. They were a dormant force, waiting for the right trigger to reemerge. "What do you suggest we do?" Varric asked. The human leaned back, a weary look crossing his face. "Return to your council. Tell them what you found. But tell them this as well. If they value peace, they'll leave us in peace. Humanity isn't interested in ruling the stars again. We've done that before, and it nearly destroyed us. But if we're provoked, we'll fight, and you won't like the outcome." Kor glanced nervously at Varric, but the captain remained steady. "And if we leave you alone? If we let the myths of humanity remain just that, myths?" The human's expression softened slightly. "Then perhaps the galaxy can avoid repeating its mistakes. We've been watching for a long time. We know how this story goes if it's allowed to play out.